All right, today we're opening up a historical case file on a king from the early 9th century BC. His name was Abijah, and his story is less of a straightforward biography and more of a fascinating contradiction. Was he a hero? A villain? Well, as we're about to see, it's complicated.
And that's really the heart of the matter, isn't it? I mean, how can two historical records, both considered sacred, paint such wildly different portraits of the same person? One account says he's a sinner, the other says he's basically a saint. It's a puzzle, and we're going to try and piece it together.
You see, for King Abijah, it all comes down to which book you happen to be reading. We're going to look at two ancient accounts of his really short, but as we'll see, incredibly important reign. One paints him as a failure, a total disgrace. The other, it portrays him as a champion of faith, a real hero. So how can both be right? Let's find out. Okay, so to really get a handle on Abijah, we first have to step back in time and into his world. And it was a world of division, of conflict, and some seriously high-stakes political drama.
See, after this supposed golden age under King Solomon, the whole kingdom just shattered. And this wasn't some minor political disagreement, you know. This was a deep, bitter civil rivalry that literally pitted brother against brother in what was pretty much a constant state of conflict.
Now, Abijah's kingdom of Judah, down in the south, was the clear underdog, no question. The northern kingdom of Israel, led by this rival king named Jeroboam, was bigger, wealthier, and way more powerful. So while Judah had the history and the sacred temple on its side, Israel had all the economic might.
And here's the really cool part. We actually have archaeological proof of Abijah's dynasty. This inscription, carved in stone by an enemy king no less, explicitly mentions the House of David. So this confirms that his family line wasn't just a story. It was a real, recognized political power, a force to be reckoned with.
Okay, so with the scene set, let's turn to our first piece of evidence. This is the official report on Abijah from the Book of Kings, and well, it's a pretty damning indictment. You get the feeling the writer had a very specific story they wanted to tell.
The Book of Kings is brief, and it is brutal. Man, this book does not pull any punches. It gives Abijah a failing grade, focusing completely on his personal moral and religious failings. It says he was an idolater, just like his dad, and that his kingdom only survived because of a divine promise made to his great-grandfather, King David, not because of anything he did. In this version, he's just a placeholder, a weak link in the chain.
But wait, that's not the whole story, not even close, because there's this other historical account, the Book of Chronicles, and it paints a completely different picture, one of a hero, not a sinner. And it becomes clear pretty fast that this storyteller has a very different goal. The Book of Chronicles kind of just breezes past Abijah's personal life and focuses instead on this single epic battle. And I mean, look at these numbers. The odds were stacked impossibly against him. 400,000 men from Judah against 800,000 from Israel. It's a classic David versus Goliath scenario. They were outnumbered 2-1. This situation looked absolutely hopeless.
So, according to this account, right before the battle, Abijah gives this incredible, rousing speech. He frames the whole conflict not as politics, but as a spiritual contest, a fight for the true kingship promised to David's family through a covenant of salt. Now that sounds a little weird, right? But in the ancient world, salt was a preservative. So a covenant of salt meant an eternal, unbreakable promise.
The battle kicks off, and right away it's a total disaster. The Israeli army springs a trap and completely surrounds Judah's forces. But instead of surrendering, the men of Judah cry out for help, and their priests sound the trumpets. And this act of faith, according to Chronicles, triggers a miraculous intervention that just turns the tide of the battle in an instant. And the result? Absolute devastation for the northern kingdom. The text claims 500,000 of Israel's soldiers were lost. 500,000! That is a staggering number, and a victory on that scale would have crippled his rival's power for years.
So here we are. We've got these two completely conflicting portraits of the same man, Abijah the sinner and Abijah the conquering hero. How in the world do we reconcile these two versions of history?
This is the big question, the one that's puzzled historians and theologians for centuries. Which account is true? Was he a faithful king who earned a great victory? Or was he a sinful king who was just a pawn in some larger divine plan? Or, and this is a fascinating thought, could he somehow be both? When you lay it all out like this, you can really start to see what's going on. The authors had totally different agendas.
The writer of Kings was acting like a moral judge, basically grading each king on their personal piety. But the writer of Chronicles, who was writing later on, was more of a storyteller, weaving this grand narrative about David's dynasty and the temple. They were just using Abijah's story to make very different points.
But here's the thing, no matter which portrait you favor, Abijah's brief reign from about 913 to 911 BC was an absolutely critical turning point. Whether it was through divine grace or his own military genius, he secured the throne, and that ensured the survival of the Davidic dynasty for his son Asa, who would go on to be a famous reformer.
And that might be the biggest takeaway from all of this. The story of King Abijah shows us a profound truth about history itself. It's not just a record of facts, it's an interpretation of what those facts mean. It's about the why just as much as the what. Both accounts of Abijah could be true, just seen through a different lens, each with its own purpose.
This leaves us with a pretty provocative question to chew on. What if history is less about what actually happened and more about who gets to tell the story? For King Abijah, the storyteller was everything. They defined his legacy. And it really makes you wonder, how many other figures from history are not quite what they seem?